the most scandalous coaching firings in college football history, and this doesn't rank with the worst of the worst. However, it is something that is disturbing to say the very least. That hazing would still be happening in this day and age of college football, including hazing with a sexual innuendo is the nicest way I can put it. Caleb, were you surprised that Pat Fitzgerald was fired as quickly as he was? As of Friday, it was going to be a 2-week suspension. Fitzgerald said in a statement, no more information has come up. However, Northwestern wasn't going to wait. They were going to make the move. I think some more information did come up, maybe that he's not aware of. And suddenly, one of the esteemed programs in Northwestern in the entire nation is looking for a head football coach. Tennessee's seen bad timing as far as having to hire a football coach, and that's secondary to what happened at Northwestern. But this is a bad time to have to hire a football coach, Caleb. No question about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I was shocked they moved this quickly because I think Pat Fitzgerald is a rare commodity doing the job that could be done at Northwestern. And we're obviously going to talk a little bit later about how bad of a job that may or may not be. But I thought they would, because of all the work he had done there, I thought they would wait and try to see how much for more information to come out, see what he knew. I kind of, having covered a lot of these instances myself, I don't like to immediately cast aspersions specifically on the head coach because we don't know. A lot of times we aren't aware how involved or not they were, but you can still rate the scandal overall, regardless of whether or not you think the coach was involved. I mean, so there was the whole Baylor situation a few years ago. To this day, people debate how involved Art Briles really was. A lot of people think he was railroaded in that situation. But whether or not he was, it was a scandal in itself. So I wonder how that applies with Northwestern. You're right, not the worst scandal we've seen in college football, but maybe top 10 this century, would you say, in terms of scandal-ridden coach firings?
Now, Caleb, it could be, but it could get a whole lot worse. We don't know the extent of this. The Joe Paterno thing just kind of started as a small seed that grew into a sapling that grew into an oak tree. So we don't know at this point. I tend to believe it's going to be worse. And the reason I say that is because Pat Fitzgerald was a Northwestern guy through and through. I don't think they would pull the trigger unless they thought it was pretty serious. This is the equivalent of making a move like this if something like this were to happen with a Johnny Majors or Philip Fulmer because of their ties to the university. So I don't think you do it lightly. But let's all be grown-ups here, Caleb, for a second. They were 1-11 last year. There was a time when Northwestern looked like they were knocking at the door of the elite in the Big Ten. And had they done that and broken through, I don't think they're necessarily pulling the trigger over this scandal. I think the 1-11 is a big factor in this and probably makes it a lot easier to pull the Band-Aid all at once.
Yeah, and particularly when Northwestern is somewhat like the Vanderbilt of the Big Ten, which is they're kind of happy to take the Big Ten check and be an academic school and focus on that. And being good in football is a nice bonus, but they're not going to let they're not going to let a scandal in football, particularly when they're 1-11, like you said, drag down the university as a whole. I mean, Penn State with Joe Paterno, one way worse scandal, but a different story altogether. But let's be honest, we all probably agree that, Dave, I don't know how you felt, but when I saw the Penn State kids marching in defense of Joe Paterno and put the statue back up, the university back in 2015, I mean, forget football. The school at that point, I'm like, I would never let my kid go to Penn State now. I mean, I'm sorry. I just think there's too much of a black mark on the school. I would never let my kid go there now because of that. So I think Northwestern doesn't want that happening.
I've always wondered, and maybe we could look that up at some point. We've seen Nick Saban and the attendance at Alabama, not just football players, but we've seen Nick Saban have this huge impact on the number of players that have just attended the university, Caleb. But I wonder if Penn State was hit by overall enrollment and if they lost enrollment. I'm just talking about regular students, not even athletes. Now, if we look at some of the most scandalous coaching firings in college football history, we're talking about crimes against humanity. We're not talking about Alabama paid Antonio Leon, right? So we're on a different level. Okay. So I just want to make that very, very clear. We're talking about crimes against humanity. I can't possibly imagine one that's worse than Joe Paterno. To me, that's in a class all by itself. I mean, we're going to talk some different ones, but Caleb, isn't that just, that's another level, right?
It's next level scandalous, next level criminal, and next level embarrassing that Joe Paterno probably had more support than any of the other people that were fired, and he probably committed the worst crime. And I will never forget, I was just a fan at the time, and I was a student. You were covering Tennessee. But my first foray into Joe Paterno was that 2000. I knew about him like everybody, but that 2006 Tennessee Penn State Outback Bowl. Remember that game, the Foster fumble, where Joe Paterno coached the game, sitting in the stands, and got media coverage like he had something to do with that win, and he carried himself like he was just some sort of godly saint. And I don't know, something stuck out to me about that. That like this guy just seems like a lying, fake snake that just, considers himself a saint above reproach. I mean, almost like, you talk about like the scandals in the Catholic Church, and when you hear about certain like priests that feel like they're above reproach and the way the church handled it, I felt that with Penn State then, and then it turned out, well, there were some similarities there with Joe Paterno.
There was. So the others that we talk about as far as big time scandals would be Hugh Freeze, obviously at Ole Miss, and did he pay players? Yeah. But he also paid escorts, so that was not a good one.
And that scandal's worse than it looks on its face, by the way, because he also lied to players that they weren't going to get on probation, so they couldn't enter the transfer portal in time. And that's why the school threw Houston Nutt under the bus, because they were just waiting until the transfer portal window, which was much narrower during that time, passed, so the recruits would be stuck at Ole Miss. So he's a huge liar. Also,
I honestly wasn't aware of that part. Makes it worse, but still, we're not talking about the Joe Paterno level, and these are all kind of on that second level.
Unless maybe though, because the other part that makes it worse is there were rumors. I want to say it's unconfirmed, but a lot of people believe that Hugh Freeze was not ordering those escorts for himself. Let's just put it at that.
That's disgusting too, but allowing a pedophile to be on your campus and have his own office and have access to the facilities at Penn State, that for years, that to me is another level. DJ Durkin, those that don't know, pushed to players so hard, and for those on the message board having a little bit of trouble connecting to that, so my apologies for that. But DJ Durkin was a guy that pushed a player so hard and didn't seem to care whatsoever that he was suffering from heat illnesses, and the player passed away. And that obviously is something. And this came at a time too. This wasn't in the late 70s where you used to suck on a wet towel for water. You used to have salt tablets. You didn't believe that you should have water. I remember Doug Bickey coming up to me in practice one time. He said, "Water? We never had water at our practice." I mean, that sounds crazy now, but that was the situation. But this DJ Durkin can't use that as a defense, because that happened years later. You mentioned the Art Briles situation against, I believe, sexual assault was happening on a day-to-day basis, and I do believe that he was involved in covering that up. There is some gray area. And you mentioned the Vols with the sexual assault lawsuit in 2015. Where did you want to go there?
So it was, and I got the date wrong, it's 2016. Tennessee was sued for the sexual assault. So there was the AJ Johnson situation that happened in 2014. And in 2015, a women's advocacy group filed a sexual assault lawsuit against the university that detailed incidents going all the way back to the Peyton Manning incident in 1996. I mean, that was one of the things they named.
So this
And
is the one that rehashed the Peyton Manning thing. And for people like me that cover the Peyton Manning thing, I was thinking to myself, why is this getting rehashed? So this is the rehashment, so to speak, and why all that stuff came back up, right?
yes, this was the rehashment. And as a matter of fact, the women's advocacy group was kind of getting mad that national media was so focused on the Peyton Manning thing, because they're like, this is just a minor example, but there's so many greater examples. We're just using this as an example of the overall lawsuit. Because if you take the Peyton Manning thing in a vacuum, well, at that point, there's so much gray area there that it doesn't really help their case. They just mentioned it as an example in the lawsuit. And this is what I talked about the other day. Dre Bowles had transferred to Michigan State, and he came out and he claimed that he spoke to the police about the AJ Johnson incident, and that Butch Jones had ordered, I believe it was Kurt Magid and a couple other teammates, to jump him for selling out a teammate. That's the rumor. And they had to call this press conference. It was really bad. Butch Jones said the worst thing you could possibly say, which is this lawsuit is bad for recruiting, which is not the thing you say when you're dealing with sexual assault lawsuits. And the only reason, I thought there was a lot of gray area, and I didn't think any coach should have been fired over it at the time. But I thought the way Butch Jones handled it publicly was so bad that had Tennessee not had a top 10 team with Josh Dobbs coming back and everybody back, I think many people would have been willing to pull the trigger on Butch Jones at that point. I just think there was a lot of hope for that 2016 season. And
interesting. It would have been a hard time to pull the trigger, just like it was with Northwestern. And if you want to talk about the Peyton Manning issue for a moment, do I believe either side completely, that it was just a mooning or that it was physical contact between Peyton Manning and the trainer? No, I don't believe either side fully. And Jamie White had reached out to every media member, including me, to rehash this story on a number of different occasions. So I think there was an agenda driven there. By the way, hit subscribe and like. We greatly appreciate that. Brings more people into the channel. So, Caleb, I have trouble believing that either side is 100%. As with most situations like this, it is somewhere in the middle.